The Vadarya Prime is the newest weapon in Warframe, and it is an absolute powerhouse, dealing tens and sometimes even hundreds of millions of damage. But even though it's a sniper rifle, it does have crazy AoE capabilities as well. So, in this Warframe guide, I'm gonna tell you how to get the Vadarya Prime yourself, which mechanics make it so special, and of course, we have builds. As always, big shout out to all our generous channel members, and now, let's jump right into it. First things first though, while not overpowered, the Vadarya Prime is a very strong weapon, and that's why you might want to have it for yourself. So, here's how you can get it. The components for the Vadarya Prime drop from the Meso V2, the Neo A15, Axii S18, and the Lith 04 relics. As per usual, there are a ton of different ways on how to obtain these relics, but in my opinion, the most efficient farms are for the Meso, doing a T2 defense mission where you can get it in the A rotation, Legicide Harvest, also A rotation, or run the capture mission Uko in the Void, where the percentage chance of having a drop is lower, but therefore speedrunning the mission is much faster. For the Neo A15, either play the Disruption mission Apollo on Lua where you can get it in the A rotation, or also run the Uko Void capture. The Axii one also drops from the Lua Disruption Apollo, but here not in the A but in the B and C rotations. Plus, you could also do any tier 3 interception missions. Also here, B and C rotations can drop this Axii relic. As for the Lith 04, that one's very simple. Do the capture mission Hepid in the Void. Overall, personal tip on my side is, especially the Neo and the Axii relic, those two farms can neatly be combined by doing Apollo Lua, where you get the Neo ones in the A and then the Axii ones in the B and C rotation. So that's probably what I would do. But yeah, now that you can get the foundry going, let's take a look at how the Vadarya actually works, because there is quite a lot to unpack here. At first though, of course, the absolute basics. It's a sniper rifle, it does sniper rifle things, you zoom in and then click on the enemy until they're gone. So far nothing new. In terms of stats, this thing is very much made to be a crit weapon with a high base crit chance, good critical damage multiplier, and a status chance of 18%, which would be fine on a rapid fire weapon, but on a low fire rate semi-automatic weapon, status is nothing to write home about and I wouldn't recommend modding for it. The damage is pure electricity, but one more interesting thing about the Vadarya Prime is that you don't shoot it like a normal weapon, but instead the shot will need to be charged first. Now, so far nothing special. However, the big thing about the Vadarya Prime are not its normal characteristics, but its unique trait. Whenever you hit a target, then it creates a small invisible AoE around that target, where it has a chance to spawn up to 3 lightning strikes on random enemies in that AoE. Either 1, 2, or 3 at the same time, and if you're unlucky, then also sometimes none at all. But what makes these lightnings incredibly cool and very strong is that the lightning strike damage scales with the mods on your weapon. And while Warframe is usually infamous for having a decent bit of spaghetti code going on, in my testing, it actually seemed to work pretty darn well in the sense that it really scaled with pretty much everything that I had on the weapon. Base damage, elemental damage, crit chance, crit damage, faction damage, and even the arcane. The only real thing that didn't work with the lightning strikes was the added damage from galvanized aptitude, but then again, this kinda makes sense because the mod itself says that this added damage only applies to direct hits, which apparently those strikes do not count as. Now, as I just said, Warframe does have quite a lot of weird interactions when it comes to weapon effects like this, so I can imagine that you probably have a few questions as to how this weapon behaves with certain Warframe interactions, so I tested a bunch of these and here are my results. First off, if you use any type of elemental imbuement that works not as an elemental infusion, but rather as a separate damage instance, like Toxic Lash, like Zaja's Whisper, Cyto 9's Ammo, or Oraxia, then it unfortunately just does not work. Yes, the initial hit will of course benefit from whichever imbuement you have, but the lightning strikes that come down, they don't inflict this second damage instance at all, so those 4 interactions are unfortunately a dead end. However, while these 4 Warframes unfortunately can't break the Vadarya Prime, there are 2 cases in which it's kind of sort of possible. And those are blast damage, as well as specifically Nova with her 4th ability. Let me explain. See, the lightning strikes are triggered whenever you hit an enemy with a shot from your weapon. And if you inflict a blast status effect with your Vadarya Prime, and that then causes the blast explosion, then this explosion, when it hits enemies in its AoE, counts as hit by the weapon, and therefore it too can trigger subsequent lightning strikes. The same thing is going on with Nova's 4. When you cast it, you prime enemies in an AoE, and when you then take them out, those enemies will explode on death, and also this explosion counts as if it was a hit by your weapon directly, so also here there is potential for follow-up lightning strikes. Let's talk about how we can take advantage of this. First of all, in the case of Blast, if we were to manage to always trigger a Blast status effect with a lightning strike, then that would mean we can create a chain reaction, since every lightning strike creates a blast, which then after the explosion triggers a second lightning strike, and so on and so forth. Problem though is, we can't do that with simply the Vadarya Prime itself, because its base status chance is not high enough to get enough blasts out to start this chain reaction in the first place. So if we want to go for a blast, there is one specific loadout that can do that, and that would be Lavos with a specific augment, Valence Formation. See, what this does is, when you imbue an ability with an element and then cast that ability, your weapon will be infused with that element, and this is the important part, it will always have a guaranteed status effect. This way, we can ignore the low status chance on the Vadarya Prime and ensure that every single hit and every single lightning strike will in and of itself again trigger a blast and therefore a follow-up lightning strike, which leads to the nice chain reaction that you saw in the intro, that you've probably seen on YouTube already, and that you also see in the background right now. As for Nova, it's actually relatively similar. All you gotta do is cast your 4th ability to prime the enemies, and then take one of them out. This one will then trigger the explosion, and every enemy hit by that explosion will then again be considered hit by the weapon and trigger follow-up lightning strikes. Now, this was a whole lot of yapping, I agree, so let's take a look at how to build it, and here I have 2 builds prepared for you. One that is specifically made for the sniper playstyle where you want to go for headshots and big damage numbers, and the other one goes more into multi-shot. However, in my personal testing, it didn't perform as well as the headshot one. Comes down to personal preference, I think. If you're not that much of a precise player, you might still want to settle for the second one. That's why I included it. Now, for the headshot one, the first thing that we definitely got to do here is primary acuity. This gives us more weak point damage, more weak point crit chance, a incredibly strong mod. A problem is it locks our multi-shot, so we can never have more than one multi-shot here. And then the rest of the build is kind of what you would expect, right? A lot of crit chance and crit damage because we want to really amp up the crit on this weapon with the high initial crit chance and multiplier. And then all I do is go for faction damage. If you don't like faction damage, you could just replace it with anything else that gives you more damage. And I also went for Prime Shred. This increases our fire rate and also the charge up time of the Vadarya Prime, so that is really comfortable because otherwise it takes quite a bit of time to charge. If you wanted to, you could also go and use Vile Acceleration for even more fire rate. However, I personally think the punch through is actually worth it, because in high enemy density scenarios, you can hit multiple enemies at the same time, which also means multiple lightning strikes triggered at the same time as you deal multiple hits with the same bullet. And then finally, because this here is an example build against Grineer, I use the last mod slot for Toxin. That neatly combines with the initial electricity into Corrosive, which is very good against Grineer. If that's not what you want to do, either use a different elemental combination or don't use it at all. You're free to replace this with whatever you like. Finally, in the Arcane, we go for Primary Deadhead, which not only gives us tons of base damage, but also it gives us an additional 30% headshot multiplier, meaning even more damage on this headshot build. If you wanted to, you could unlock the Excella slot as well, put Vigilante supplies in there for that extra bit of crit chance. I didn't really want to invest that for this weapon, so feel free to do whatever you like. As for the multi-shot version of this mod, not all that much changes, to be honest. We're still on Primary Deadhead, we still try to hit those headshots because they deal more damage. If you really don't want to go for this, you could replace it with Primary Merciless if you just can't be bothered to hit those heads. However, I would not necessarily recommend Primary Blight or Primary Frostbite, unless of course you have any infusions or effects that make it easier to trigger those status effects, because your status chance is still so low that you're gonna struggle to stack those arcanes up all by yourself without any external buffs. The rest of the build is pretty much the same, with the only exception of course that we replaced Primary Acuity with Galvanized Chamber to get those multi-shots. I personally prefer the headshot build if I'm intending to play the Vadarya Prime as a standard sniper rifle without chain reaction gimmick. And then when I go for Lavos with the blast chain reaction, then I kinda prefer the multi-shot build actually, because to me it felt like it was easier and faster to get the chain reaction going this way, especially if you don't aim for the heads and primarily go for body shots. Overall, as a final verdict from my side, is it the craziest meta weapon in the game? Definitely not, but it looks beautiful, is fun to play, and if you ask me, it's worth investing a couple forma. And if you want to have an updated build on the also new Caliban Prime, then you can find that right here. Another massive shout out to Niels V, Demon Lord Cell, Demon Emperor, Emperor Prime, Nos Linux Gaming, Turtlepeer, Undercaneo2, Skylar Bowser, Mihawky, Phil the Meme, Socrates the Almighty Rat, Leo Murasaki, Shadow Lockhart, Antagas, Patrosator, Boomia1, Mr. Games Plays, Zaif, and all other generous channel members for your continuous support. We see each other hopefully in the next one, and until then, as always, good lightning zapping.